What's going on, guys? John Elder here from codingview.com, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use web forms for your Flask project with WTF and Python. Alright guys, like I said, in this video, we're going to look at web forms using WTF. But before we get started, if you like this video and want to see more like it, be sure to smash the like button below, subscribe to that channel, give me a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, and check out codingview.com where I have dozens of courses with hundreds of videos that teach you to code. Use coupon code YouTube1 to get $30 off membership with all my courses, videos, and books for a one-time fee of just $49, which is insanely cheap. Okay, like I said, in this video, we're going to look at web forms using something called WTF, WTF. And I've got other videos on a prior Flask playlist that show you how to use forms without WTF if you want to just sort of bare knuckle, create these things on your own. But there's some drawbacks to that. For instance, there's no CSRF tokens, there's no form validation, there's no image upload, there's no file upload system, all those good things that you want with a web form. And WTF does that for you automatically. So it's really cool and it's really easy to use. And that's what we're going to start to look at in this video. So we've got this little form here. It says, what's your name? I can type John, click the button. It says, hello, John. And you'll notice this is a nice looking form. It kind of glows when we click on it. That's Bootstrap. We've bootstrapified this. We've got the nice button that looks bootstrappy and all that good stuff. So that's what we're going to work on in this video. So we've got our code that we've previously used. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And you can find the link to the code for this in the comment section below, as well as the link to the playlist for the other Flask videos in this Flask Friday series. It's Flask Friday. So the first thing we need to do is head over to our terminal and install WTF. And notice I'm in my C Flasker directory. Notice my virtual environment is turned on. It says main there, which means our Git is initialized. So we're good to go. So let's go pip install flask-wtf. WTF. Cracks me up. So that will go ahead and install that. And that's really all we need to do. So now I can flask run to turn our server back on, make sure this is running. Okay, so that's good. So to use this, we need to import it into our main hello.py file. So up here at the top, we can go from flask_wtf, WTF, import FlaskForm, and that's capitalized. And we also need a couple more things. So let's go from WTForms. We want to import a couple of things. We want to import StringField, and we also want to import SubmitField. And you'll notice the second word in all of these are capitalized. This is a very C type of naming convention because WTF is not a Flask thing. It's sort of a framework agnostic form system. And then they've ported it to all the different things. So there's a version of WTF for Flask, which we just installed, WTF, but it's still built on the core WTF system, which I imagine is written in C or something. Anyway, so that's that. We also need from WTForms.validators, we want to import DataRequired. And we'll talk about what this is and what these things are in just a second. Basically, anytime we want to build something in a form, we have to import it. So a string field is basically just this input box, right? We're going to type strings into it, text, right? The submit button, when we click on it, is a submit field, right? So if we had another one with images, we would have an image field, probably. I've got a list of them. I'll paste in just a second. And likewise, this validators, if, for instance, we don't type something in the field and we click the button, we want something to pop up and say, hey, you didn't fill that out. That's a validator. And the specific validator that we want is DataRequired. There's all kinds of validators. There's validators for email addresses to validate whether it's a valid email address. There's validators for URLs. There's a whole bunch of them. I got a list. I'll paste it in so you can see them. We'll go through a lot of them going forward. But for today, we just want these three things. So, okay, we've got everything imported. Now we need to come down here and create a form class. So let's say create a form class. And with this class, we're going to create it here. And then we can use it whenever we want just by sort of calling it in a specific function. So if we've got like the user page and we want to use that form, we can import that form into this user function right here or whatever, right? But we have to create it first. So actually, let's do this sort of at the top just so that it's right up there. All right, so create a class form. And actually, before we do that, we need to do one more thing. We need to create a secret key. So with forms, there's something called a CSRF token, cross-site request forgery, I think, CSRF. And what that does is it creates a little secret key on the form that then will sync up behind the scenes with another secret key and make sure that a hacker hasn't hijacked your form and is trying to do some weird stuff. So all modern web forms have CSRF tokens. And in order to use a CSRF token with WTF, we need to create a little secret key on the back end here. So to do that, we just go app.config and then square brackets. And then inside of here, quotation marks, and then secret_key. We're going to create basically an environmental variable. We're going to store it in app config, which is a nice place to store things like this in our app. So to do this, now we just create a secret key. So you type in some password that only you know, right? Don't share this with anyone. Don't push this into GitHub if you're going to push it on GitHub. If it's public, you don't want people to be able to see this secret key. So for now, we're just going to leave it right here because I don't really care. But in the future, we might try and hide this a little better if we're going to post this stuff to GitHub and it's going to be public for the world. So keep this secret. I'm just going to type in my super secret key that no one is supposed to know, whatever. So that's my secret key, right? So it will take that, scramble it up, do some stuff with it. We don't really care what that's all about. That'll work for now. So, okay, we've got our secret key. Now we can create our class for the form itself. And what I want to do is create a form that has one input box and one submit box. Just very simple, very basic form while we're learning how to do this. So I'm going to create a class and I'm going to call this namer form because we're going to ask for somebody's name. So I'm going to call it namer form. It doesn't really matter what you call it. And we want to inherit FlaskForm, which is this guy we imported up here, right? So we're going to use FlaskForm in there. And now we just sort of define what we want. We want a name and we want a submit button, right? So for name, this is going to be a string field. Remember this guy up here, right? So it's a string field. And then we can give it a little label if we want. I can say, what's your name? And then let's also give this a validator. So we can go validators and then equal and then square brackets. And then we want DataRequired. And this is a function. So we put the little parentheses. And this DataRequired is just this DataRequired up here that we imported earlier. Right? So like I said, if you don't fill out the form, this little validator will pop up and say, hey, you didn't fill out the form. Please enter something in this field, right? That's what a validator does. And what are we validating? Just data. Just we want something to be in the field. We don't really care what, it's just data. So it's required and it's data. So we use DataRequired. So for submit, this is up here, we called this SubmitField. So down here, we want to use SubmitField. And then for the button itself, we want it to say submit, right? Okay, so that's really all there is to it. We can now use this form whenever we want on a web page. So let's create a new web page. Let's go up to our templates and let's create a new file. And let's go to File, Save As. And I'm going to call this name.html. And let's go to our index page here. I'm just going to copy all of this and bring it over here and paste it. And we can get rid of all of this stuff. But we do want the block content, right? We want to extend our base so that we get our navbar and all that good stuff. And then we want the block content. So just for right now, let's just type what's your name in an H1 tag, just so that we can see if this page exists while we create it. So we've got the template. Now let's head over to our hello.py file and create the actual route and the function. So let's go create name page. So we need a route. So let's go app.route. And I want to point this at /name. Now we also need to do something else. We need to give this a method, or actually methods. And we want to be able to use the get method as well as the post method. And if you're not familiar with get and post, anytime you have a form, you're either going to get or post that form, right? So you usually almost always post a form and you get a web page, right? So when you fill out a form, you click the button, you're essentially posting it to the back end. So we have to define that this page will be able to allow things to be posted to it, right? So we put methods equal post. So that's our route. Now let's define the function itself. So let's go define name. Now normally, for instance, this user, we return render template, and we still want to do that. So I could put that in there, but we want to point this to name.html, which is this file we just created here, right? And we don't need to pass anything in here just yet. So I'll leave that blank. But now we also need to pass in our form that we created up here, right? So to do that, we just come down here and we say the name of this thing is none. It doesn't have a name, and I'll explain what that is in just a second. And then the form we want to use is namer form, right? So this is namer form with parentheses because up here, we called it name or form, right? So we're saying, hey, use that form, basically. So now, the reason why I'm creating a variable called name is because when we fill out this form, it's creating, let's see, where's our form? It's creating a name, right? And when the page loads the first time, there isn't gonna be a name. So we're gonna set that to none. And then if somebody fills out the form with a name, name will equal whatever they put in that form. But for the first time, it's gonna say none, and you'll see why in just a second, because we wanna do a little logic when the page first loads. So, okay, we've got name and we've got form. Now we need to pass these onto the page itself. So we do that down here like always. We could just set name equal to name, and let's set form equal to form. So this form is this guy. This name is this guy, right? And then we'll access them on the page itself by referencing this name variable and this form variable. Now we're almost done. We also need to validate some stuff. So we want to go if form dot validate underscore on underscore submit, and that's a function, then name equals form.name.data and form.name.data now equals nothing. So we're saying, hey, if somebody submits the form and then take whatever name they submitted, assign it to this name variable, because otherwise name is none, right? So we got to say, hey, if they filled it out, make name whatever they filled out in that thing, and then we'll sort of clear it for the next time around. And then we'll pass these things in to our template right here. So, okay, that looks good. So let's go ahead and save this and let's run this just to see if this page shows up. So our server is running in the background. Head back over here and let's go to localhost :3000. There's no link there. We need to create one. But for now, I can just come up here and type in /name. And it says, what's your name? So that seems to be working. So before we go forward, let's create a quick link in our navbar that points to this page so we don't have to type it in every time. So let's head over to our navbar over here. Come down here, find a link. This one will work. I'm just going to copy it, paste it in again. But the URL for is now going to point to name, and we don't need to define a name beforehand. And then I want the link URL to just say name. So, okay, let's go ahead and save this and run it, make sure that looks okay. So come back to the main page, hit reload, name shows up. When I click it, it goes, what's your name? Okay, so far so good. Now we need to put the form itself on this page. So let's head back over here to our name page, and I'm gonna get rid of this. And we want to do some logic here. So the first time around, if somebody comes to the page, we want the form to appear, and we want it to say, what's your name, right? If they click on the button, it will post and redirect back to this same page. And if that's the case, we want to say, hello, Bob, or whatever. And we don't want that form to be there anymore because they've already filled it out, right? So we need a little logic for that. So we can use our regular Jinja here, and we could go if name. So if name exists, then what? Well, if name exists, let's go h1, hello, and then let's just print out whatever that name is. Exclamation mark, because I'm very excited, right? Else, again, Jinja, we want to do something else. And we want to go h1, what's your name? And then we want the form. I'll just type form for now. And then down here somewhere, we need to end if, because whenever we open an if statement, we always need to close it. And inside of here, we need to put the form itself. So actually, let's put a little line break in here. So there's a space between the what's your name and the form itself. So how do we use the form? Well, whenever you create any form in any web framework at all, you create a form tag. You set the method equals to post almost always. And then you always close your form tag at the end. So now we just need to build out this form. So let's create a couple of tags here. And the first thing we want is form.hidden_tag. And that's a function. This will create our CSRF token. And you notice we're calling form.things. If you remember back in our hello.py file, we're passing form so we can reference form.whatever. And this form.whatever has all of the stuff that we defined in the class when we created it, right? So we can reference all that stuff. So hidden tags is one of the things we can do. We can also do form.name.label, right? And that is going to be up here, this label right here that we put in here, right? So that's the label for this field. So that's cool. And we also want the input box itself. So that's form.name, right? Because of course, back here, we call this name. It's a string field. That's input box basically. Okay, so form.name. This one probably needs a function thing. We'll do that. And let's also put a line break here. And now we need the button. So the button is just form.submit, right? And that should do the trick. So let's go ahead and save this and see how this looks. Come back over here, hit reload. Okay, so it says, what's your name? Now notice this doesn't look great. We haven't bootstrapified it yet, but all right, it looks like it should work. So let's type in John, click the button, hello, John, and it works. Now we come back to name again. It starts all over again. So that's all there is to this, and it's really cool. Now, what if I don't fill out the form, but I still click the button? Hey, it turns red, a little thing pops up. Please fill out this form field. That's what the validator is. Very, very cool, and really easy, really nice to use. So, okay, we've got this thing. Now it doesn't look great. Let's bootstrapify this. Remember, if we head back over here to our code and look at our base.html, we've used the Bootstrap framework. So that means we can use all the Bootstrap stuff in our code. So let's come back over here to Get Bootstrap, click on Docs for documentation, come down here to Forms, there it is, and click Overview. Now they've changed the whole form system for Bootstrap 5. This was very different in all the prior versions, and Bootstrap 5 just came out, it's pretty new. So it's a little different if you've used Bootstrap before. Now, in order to use things, we used to have to create a form group and then use form control tags for everything, right? You still use form control tags, but you don't have to use the other thing, the form group, I think it was called. So we actually don't have to do anything at all. We don't have to call a class on form. All we have to do is give whatever we want a class of form control for the thing. Labels get a class of form label, right? So let's do that one first. So I'll just copy that. Now, where do we put this in our code? This is a little tricky. Well, we've got this form name.label. We can give this parentheses, and we can pass in a class right there, right? So you see, there it is. Let me give it some space. I just pasted in class form-label. And we can do the same thing to these guys here, right? So let's head back over here to Bootstrap, and let's see, we want class form control. So I'll copy that, bring that back over here. And for our name right there, I'll pass that in, class form control. And finally, for the submit button itself, we want, let's see, BTN primary. And this will change color based on the button that you pick. Primary is a blue button, which we probably don't want, but we can start out there. So, okay, class BTN-primary. So, okay, let's go ahead and save this and reload this. See how this looks. And boom, now we have Bootstrap forms. We click on them, they kind of glow, they stretch out the whole screen. We can resize that later if we want. This is nicer looking text. The button is blue. Now I don't really like the button, so we can come over here to components, click on buttons. Here's a list of buttons. Here's this gray button, it's called secondary. So instead of BTN primary, we'll use BTN secondary. So we can just copy that because I like that gray button. It goes with our theme more, right? Dark colors and stuff. So head back over here. And instead of primary, boom, it's secondary. Save this, come back, reload, boom, just that easy. Now it's gray. We might want to change this button up here to secondary instead of green. So we can do that real quick if we want. Head over to our Navbar. There it is. And look down here for the search thing. There it is. BTN outline success. We want BTN outline secondary. So if we save this and run it, boom, now that's gray. Whatever. And we'll keep it like that because we've got a theme going on here. And again, this now works. So maybe we'll try Bob this time. Hello, Bob. And you'll notice the form disappears. It just says hello, Bob. We can go back by clicking name up here and it starts it all over again. But very cool. And that's how you create forms. Now, I mentioned earlier, come back and look at our main code here. We use the StringField and the SubmitField. We also use the validator of DataRequired. And I mentioned there's a bunch of these that you can choose from. So I've got a list. Let me just paste it real quick and we'll go through it very, very quickly. Let me just copy these, bring it over here. And maybe in our class form, I'll just paste these in. And I'll leave this in here so you can check the GitHub repository if you want to copy these down or whatever. But we've got Boolean field. Boolean is true or false. We've got a date field, date time field. The difference between date and date time is obviously date time has time, right? So that's cool. Decimal fields, 1.006, whatever, decimal numbers. File fields, if you want to upload a file. Hidden fields, multiple fields, field list, float field, form field, integer field, whole numbers, password field, if you want to do a password, to put little stars on the thing when you type, that's cool. Radio field for radio buttons, select field for drop-down selections, select multiple fields, submit field, we already used that one, string field, we already used that one, and text area field, that's like a box, like a square box, very useful. And then as far as validators go, there is the DataRequired, we already used that one. This was email, it validates whether it's a valid email address, which is super useful. Equal to input required IP address, if it's an IP address. Length MAC address, which is a computer networking thing. Number range from 10 to 20, whatever. Optional regular expressions. URL, that's a super useful one. Did they enter in a correct URL? A UUID is, I think, unique user identification number. Any of or none of. So these are the different validators. We'll go through and use a lot of these or several of them as we go forward building out this project. Same thing here. We'll use several of these going through and building out this project. But that's the list if you want to look at it. And also, if you're very, very curious, you can just come over here and go to Google and type in flask-wtf, what the forms. And this is the flask-wtforms documentation. Has all kinds of stuff you can read about if you're interested, or you can look at the original what the forms, right? This is the sort of the core what the forms, and then this Flask what the forms is sort of a port for it that allows us to use the original what the forms with Flask. So it's very cool. So that is how to use forms in your Flask project with cool things like validators and stuff like that. Like I said, you can bare knuckle this and create your forms without using what the forms, but then you have to do all the code for all the validation. The CSRF token is a huge pain. If you try and do that on your own, it's almost not even possible. You can use things like reCAPTCHA with what the forms that it's a lot harder to do on your own. So I just recommend that you use what the forms if you're going to use forms in your Flask project. Super easy, as you've seen in this video. Doesn't take but a few minutes, and really cool. So that's all for this video. If you liked it, be sure to smash the like button below, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, and check out codemy.com where you can use coupon code YouTube1 to get $30 off memberships. It pays just $49 to access all my courses, over 47 courses, hundreds of videos, and the PDFs of all my best-selling coding books. Join over 100,000 students learning to code just like you. My name is John Elder from codemy.com, and I'll see you in the next video.